Okay, we're good. Okay, so first, how about you introduce yourself?
My name is Lexi Cooper. I'm 19 years old and I'm going to be a sophomore in college.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be reading these questions from my phone today, just so that anyone watching this video is wondering. We are going to be talking about racial issues in America in specific regards, talking about African American issues. So we'll start off with some broad questions first, just to get kind of like a vibe.
Okay.
So we'll just start with the most basic question. What is it like to be an African American in America?
I guess the most basic answer would be it's different. It's definitely like you get a lot of different looks about even having darker skin. And, I don't even get the worst of it because I'm a light-skinned African American person. And you get these looks in stores, or you get these looks in restaurants. And like my family, who is white, a lot of the times they don't even notice it. But I do. And so I have to explain to them they're not just looking over here to look over here. You know what I mean? And going into a grocery store or talking with people, even about racial inequality, a lot of the times I get things like, you're not black enough to talk about these things. You're not black enough to do these things. And I'm like, what constitutes black enough? You know what I mean? Because I've been called the N-word with the hard R. I've been discriminated against because of my color, even in the theater community.
Yeah.
Every day, that things like this happen every single day, and it's just different.
Yeah. Okay. So going off of that, because of the color of your skin, do you think that you were treated differently in school by teachers?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the time, especially in my history classes or in high school, I took this class called genocide. A lot of the times, a lot of the questions about police brutality and racial inequalities and stuff like that, I would get looked at to be the talking point of the class, and all of my classmates would look back at me, expecting me to have answers for it instead of talking for themselves about it, just because they a lot of people will acknowledge that I live differently than them, but they won't acknowledge that they have a voice about it too.
Okay. So because of being treated differently in school, did you have different feelings about going to school? Did you feel more unsafe in school, or did you still feel safe enough as per se a white kid, or did you feel equally as unsafe as anyone else would?
For me personally, I felt safe. I had all of my friends of course I had friends that would joke around about my skin color, as any black person would, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, I never felt unsafe. I did have worries about arguments that I would get into with people and racist comments that would be said towards me, but I was never physically afraid to go to school because of my skin color. And I can't speak for any darker skinned people at my school because I don't think we really had any. I think we were all pretty light skinned black people.
Yeah.
And for dark skinned people in these schools that are predominantly white, they have it completely different than I do. So I can't speak for them.
Okay. So as previously talked about, so you used to do musical theater. So now we're moving in a bit more into the personal questions. So
Okay.
as previously talked about, you did musical theater.
Yep.
We both of us have participated in the same shows together. However, I obviously know that we've had different experiences and you've been in different productions than I've been. So in some of those different shows that you've been in, have you ever felt that you've been typecasted, or that directors have given you a certain type of role to play just because of the color of your skin? Or do you think that they don't consider your race as a part of the issue at all?
So that's actually an interesting question because most of the time my typecast is ensemble because I'm darker, and a lot of these shows that, especially in Montana, that people do are predominantly white people. And so I would get typecasted into the ensemble because I don't look the part as the main or even the person next to the main character. You know what I mean? Because those characters were predominantly white characters. And so I never got, that's why I've been a lead in maybe 2 shows. And in those 2 shows, my directors have both been very, very welcoming, and they never took into consideration my skin color. They just saw me as an actress and they said, wow, I want her to be in that role.
Yeah.
And, but for most of these shows, I've been put in the ensemble because they have nowhere else to put me.
And do you think that's an issue in the choice of the production, the theater companies putting on certain productions, or do you think that's an issue of just people thinking this role should only be made for a white person?
I think it's both, honestly. I think a lot of the time, a lot of people have these certain expectations of the character and whether or not they should be white or black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever you want to do. You know what I mean? But I think a lot of the shows most of the time can be colorblind, and it doesn't even matter. But I think a lot of people still have this like stigma surrounding putting a black actress as the main person in a stage play. But I also think like in Billings this year or next year, they're doing Moana, but we don't have any Malaysian people here. And I think it's completely whitewashing that show. And I don't think it's okay. And it's the same thing as doing Hairspray, which Billings did a few years back. And they had to call in Black people from like California to come in and do it, because
like doing the show like The Color Purple, which is essentially an all African American cast. Like
right, and it's just not okay.
No, there are some shows that are specifically made for a bigger state or a more ethnically diverse state, and I think I would agree with you that it is an issue within the theater community that there are too many shows that are just only casting white people, or that are just specifically like, well, this person needs to be of this ethnicity. And I personally think that there's starting to become more of a change within the theater community, specifically on Broadway. I mean, Jordan Fisher was the first African-American guy to play Evan Hansen, and Hamilton was the first show that had a completely different, diverse cast.
Broadway's doing a very, very good job about it. I have read a few articles about people in the Broadway community that have done shows prior to that, and they've talked about their issues with it, and they're not necessarily the same issues I have, but there was this guy who produced a show, and they basically took the show from him and whitewashed it and completely changed the content of the show and tried to make it their show.
So that
it was like an African play, you know what I mean? Like it was. And they tried to change it and like make it into something that was consumable for white people, because white people are the majority of the people who go see Broadway shows, you know, and that's just because like the majority of the population is white people. But a lot of things that come down to like theatrics are making a white audience comfortable because that's the most of their majority. That's the majority of their population.
Yeah, and I think that can definitely be seen because like we're constantly seeing like a new influx of like Disney things becoming a musical on Broadway. Things that are easy to grasp for a white person, and like it's harder because like with shows like The Color Purple, that was only on Broadway for about a year, but then you have shows like Dear Evan Hansen who have been on for 5+ years. So it's definitely an issue of, well, it's only for this race, or it's only for these people. Like it's
right. And I think a lot of the time, a lot of people are like, this isn't a race issue. This isn't a race issue. And I completely disagree with that. This is 100% a race issue, because we still have people that are racist and bigoted towards people of color in higher positions of authority that will make it so that African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, all of these people of color can't thrive even in the theater community. And a lot of people like don't think it's like that, but it definitely is. And I think like a lot of places are starting to change 100%, and I think it's awesome that people are changing and people are starting to like understand. But I think a lot of these people who are in higher authorities need to step down and let somebody who's actually going to do something good for everybody involved.
Okay, so kind of moving on from the theater community and going on into a different subject about your family life, since we did talk a little bit about that in the beginning. So I'm well aware of this since I am one of your friends, but the audience obviously isn't. So you have a very mixed family, and not even just in the sense of like you have a stepdad and a stepmom. You have siblings of different races, of different ethnicities. So other than yourself, because you have talked about your own experiences with racism, have any of your siblings experienced like brutal racism, such as yourself, where you've been called the N-word, or they've just experienced like microaggressions or things like that?
My sister Alicia is 16 and she's Latina. Her mom is from El Salvador, so they are like 75% Hispanic.
Okay.
She's been called like she's been used as like the token like Mexican person. She's been called like what is it called?
A wet,
A derogatory term for Mexican people.
like a wetback?
Yes, yeah, exactly. She's been called stuff like that. I don't know if my little sister has experienced it, but and their grandpa, I love him to death. But he doesn't really understand the viewpoint from a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so he says very insensitive things every once in a while, and I think like that bugs them, and they're very, very opinionated and about how they feel about being treated like that. So they tell him every time he does it, and bless his heart, he doesn't mean it, but like I don't think he truly understands the generational difference and like the things that he's putting into their head at such a young age.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can see that with my own grandparents. Like my grandparents have referred to Black people as kind of like the slightly better N word.
Right.
I don't want to say it because I'm not African American.
That's okay.
But like my grandparents have also called my Asian friends things like Oriental, or like the bad Asian word.
Right.
And I think when we constantly see this and we're just allowing it for all these older people, we're just excusing them by saying, well, they're from a different generation, so it doesn't matter. Like that was appropriate for their time period, but we're not in their time period anymore. Like this isn't 1955 when segregation still existed.
Right.
Where we don't have all white schools or all Black schools. We are living in an integrated society where we all essentially are trying to be one group of people, the human race.
Right.
And we can't, by allowing certain people to say it, but not everyone to say it, it's a bad lesson for kids, especially younger white privileged kids, because it's teaching them, well, if my grandparents can say it, then I can say it.
Right.
And, I mean, I guess that's just my viewpoint on the matter, but do you have a different viewpoint on it, or is yours the same thing for that?
I think mine is pretty much the same thing. Like I had a conversation with my great grandpa the other day, and he's white. He's on my mom's side. And we were talking about how if you look up online professional hairstyle on women versus unprofessional hairstyles on women, professional shows a lot of white women and unprofessional shows a vast majority of Black women with their hairstyles. And so I was discussing with him about how the fact that most of the hairstyles that African American women wear are protective hairstyles to help their hair grow and keep it healthy and to keep it from getting damaged. And he was like, oh, I totally understand that. You know, he's 80 years old. Yeah. And then we were also talking about how like it's different, and I was explaining to him like how it's not okay for somebody to say all lives matter if they don't truly mean it, because you know, my grandpa could say all lives matter, but I know that he means it. Like my grandpa would do anything for anybody that asked him for help, no matter what your skin color is, no matter what your sexual identity is, he would do it. And I know if he said all lives matter, he would mean it. But I was like, Grandpa, you have to understand that most of these people that are saying all lives matter don't mean it. They wouldn't care about anything that happens to some person of color or a gay person or any of these people. And he was like, I totally understand that. I get that. And he was like, thank you for like talking with me about it, because I understand now.
Yeah. Well, and going back to that, talking about the different hairstyles, I think that's a very interesting thing, just because of the fact that someone who is African American, their hairstyles take a lot more time. There's a lot more hair care that goes into it. They need completely different products than a white person does. Like, I mean, speaking for myself personally, I can shampoo and conditioner and call it good. Use conditioner and call it good. That's not even close for what someone who's African American can do. They have to do way more things. They have to use different techniques in order to style their hair. I can use a hairspray and call it good.
Right.
You can't. I've personally seen you use multiple different things for it. Like,
and you know what's funny is I don't even have like type 4 curly hair. Yeah. And for a lot of these like 75 and over % African American people, they have type 4 curly hair, which is like afro, and that they have a lot of shrinkage, and you have to do different stuff for it.
And it's just like those little tiny microaggressions that we're constantly seeing in our society that I think people don't even realize are racist, because they think, well, it's just normal to say things like that. But in reality, those are just the little things that like still can do so much damage psychologically to a person, especially
Right.
like in not only your age, but also your sister's age and your little brother's age too. Like that kind of stuff is all completely damaging and can cause trauma that could last for years.
Well, my baby brother Zario, when he was, I don't know, probably maybe a year, maybe 2 years old, my dad worked at this little cafe in Laurel, and he was sitting in his high chair. You know, he was being a baby. He was making noise. He was probably throwing stuff, being bad, whatever. But these white guys over in the corner looked over at him. My dad was in the kitchen, you know, he was cooking. He just had the baby with him because he couldn't get a sitter or something, you know. And they were like, they basically said, somebody tell this monkey to shut up.
Oh my.
And Zario was a baby, like 2 years old. And I'm like, how do you say something like that to a 2-year-old? And my dad obviously got angry. Like and you know, like people like that would hold that against him for getting angry about talking about his child like that. And that's also another thing is like Black people are called criminals for being angry when somebody calls them the N-word or somebody tells them they look like a monkey and it's not criminal behavior, it's self-defense over a completely racist society.
Over something that we all know is completely racist to say. People can say that they don't understand that, like, why calling someone who's African American a monkey, why that's racist. They can say they don't understand it, but no, clearly you do, because you wouldn't call a white child a monkey. You wouldn't say that about a white kid if they were doing the same thing. You would just say, whose annoying kid is that? Or somebody tell that annoying kid to shut up. So I think it's just a completely different, like, it's amazing to me just like how people can like be so cruel to one race, because like it's something that I've seen my entire life, you know, growing up in a very white town in a very white state. So I've seen it, but it's I guess harder to hear about like the actual like little stories, because you know we hear about the big stories in school, but we don't really hear these little tiny stories, and especially now with the Black Lives Matter movement, and then we'll also get into that later. I have a lot of questions about that, but like it's just interesting to like see all these different stories, and then people are like finally, specifically white people, are finally starting to realize like this is way bigger of an issue we ever thought. And like obviously I've been friends with you since I think I've been about 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that area. Like I've known this for almost 10 years of my life. I think it's just like harder for someone who's never seen something like this. Like it's a harder concept to grasp.
Right. And I think that's totally fine. Like it's okay for people not to understand, but the problem lies when people don't want to get educated about it. It's when people want to say that things don't happen because they haven't experienced it. Like if you don't understand, that's fine. You don't have to understand, but you do need to be educated on what these people are going through and why they're protesting, why they're marching. And like, instead of criminalizing people for speaking out about injustices that are happening to them.
Yeah. Okay. So this next question, so this one kind of starts to a little bit flow into the Black Lives Matter movement, but still kind of a little bit off as well. So specifically in regards to Hollywood and talking about big name celebrities and all of that. We've seen a lot of controversy with a lot of different people like Laura Lee, Paula Deen, a whole bunch of like people who have been caught using racist terms and doing racist things. And so obviously those ones are called out almost instantly, but then we also see like these little tinier things that a lot of people don't realize is racist, and that's just the appropriation of Black culture. So in regards to like how Black culture works and to like those little things, what are like some of the things that like say a big name celebrity like Kylie Jenner or like Kim Kardashian, what are some things that like examples of just not even just them, of all celebrities, what are like some things that are appropriation of Black culture?
You know, so the Kardashians and the Jenners like to do cornrows and braids and all of that. Don't get me wrong, they look good. But my thing is just because you have Black kids doesn't mean you're standing up for Black people.
Yeah.
Like I am very lucky because my mom, the majority of my family is white, and I've been raised by white people, and they have never ever said anything racist to me. They've never been cruel to me because of my skin color. But a lot of African American people don't get the same treatment. Like, a lot of people say, I'm not racist, I have black kids, but then they like, I mean, I read this story about this mom who called her kid a monkey all the time, her black child. And I'm like, you, just because you gave birth to a black person doesn't mean that you get to act like that towards your child. And it does not mean that you understand the trials and the tribulations that an African American or a Native American or Asian American go through on a daily basis. And I think, like, the braids, a lot of people will counter argue that with the fact that African American women will wear straight wigs, okay? They'll get sew-ins, they'll get weaves, they'll do all of this stuff. But I'm gonna go back to the point about how if you look up unprofessional hairstyles on women, it's mostly black women. That's why.
Yeah, is because
that's an appropriate hairstyle in a workplace.
Yeah, even though they're celebrating who they are and they're showing off to the world, this is who I am, but it's inappropriate to do that. Right.
And I think it's completely unfair because, you know, everybody likes to say that America is this big melting pot of diversity, which is true, but it comes down to white people being comfortable with what these diverse groups of people are doing with their cultures. Yeah. And white people will be concerned about, when I was playing lacrosse, we used to sage and sweetgrass, like burn sweetgrass on our sticks and our bodies before our games to like release any negative energy. Yeah. And we had to stop doing it because a lot of white parents, and I'll remind you, I was the only black person on my team besides my other teammate, Alina, who was Native American. They didn't like us doing that. And they said that they didn't want their kids participating in it. And so we had to stop doing it because white people got uncomfortable.
And so was that sage burning thing, was that like something that was from Alina's culture, like Native American, or was that?
Yeah, so what a lot of people don't know is that lacrosse is a Native American sport. The Native Americans created lacrosse. And so throughout the years, like, it's been whitewashed pretty much to the point where a lot of people look at lacrosse as if it's a white rich kid sport. Yeah. And so, like, you don't see a lot of Native American people playing it anymore. And that's why nobody knows that lacrosse is created by Native Americans. And my coach at the time was Native American, and he wanted to embrace their culture in the game because they created it. Their ancestors created this game. And I was like, yes, we love culture. We love appreciating the Native American culture. But then people got so mad, you know, and my mom, who's white, she works on the Native American reservation at the hospital. Yeah. And she would never get offended at us saging before a game. You know what I mean? It's just it's just a completely different like perspective of people.
Yeah. Okay. So we will do 3 more questions in regards to personal life. One of them is a bit bigger than the other 2, I would say. But the first one, pretty basic and quick. So what are some TV shows and movies that you think that are like good at demonstrating what being black is like, and like celebrating being African American, and like portray like the actual life of an African American, not just some whitewashed version where it's appropriating it for a white audience where they are completely unapologetic in just being, this is what black culture is like, this is what it's like being African American. Like, what are some examples of that?
Dear White People. Mm-hmm. Definitely. I know you love that show too. I do. In that show they talk about like real life black people experiences all the time, you know, and there's like Orange is the New Black. I know the main character is a white woman, but throughout that whole show they're talking about the racial inequality in the prison system, and they're also talking about how they're talking about ICE camps in the newer seasons. They're talking about how Hispanic women in the prison system are mistreated and taken to like different prisons and completely mistreated. They weren't even allowed to call their families. They weren't even allowed to call anybody. And that's like a real life perspective on the prison system for people of color, which I think is really, really important for people to understand.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these people are getting, you know, incarcerated for no reason, when like a white guy could rape an unconscious girl and get 3 months of house arrest. A black person will go to jail for having a blunt on them. You know what I mean?
Or like
and I think
there's that one case that it's been going around Twitter a lot where that African-American guy got arrested for making out with a 17-year-old at a bar that was 21 and up. And he obviously just assumed that she was 21. And then I think he's like got about over at least a year-long sentence for sexual assault of a minor.
Well, you know, if you think about it, all of this like goes back to, I mean, we all remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird in high school.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just disgusting to me that book explains so many stories of African American people in this country today. You know, people are getting thrown in prison for having a blunt when white people are not even getting prison time for raping somebody. Mm-hmm. And it's just absolutely ridiculous to me. Another show that shows it, I never saw Black Klansmen, but I've heard that it does a really, really good job of depicting Black people's trials and tribulations. That's a hard one. There's a lot. I mean, people really just need to do their research. Like, there's a lot of shows that you can watch and get the Black person's perspective. Well, and you know, what is that movie called? Jordan Peele directed it. It was like his first big one. Get Out. You know, and that's a very symbolic movie for the life of an African American person. And I think a lot of people that went and saw it didn't understand it. But that whole movie portrays the life of a Black person and his trials. Have
you seen the alternate ending to that movie?
No.
So like the original version, it's his friend who comes and saves him, and then like they obviously go away and everything's fine. But in the alternate ending, they Jordan Peele like had this on like I think the DVD or something like that, where instead of it being his friend that came, it was 2 white officers who immediately arrested him and then threw him in jail. And that was that was the original ending that Jordan Peele wanted to use. But he was like, we wanted to like actually like make it have a good ending because we knew that it would be essentially that people would crap on it and that they would like, this is completely illogical. Like this wouldn't happen, you know, essentially all the stuff that they're saying now.
Right.
At the time when like Black Lives Matter was kind of hush hush at the time.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I get my favorite quote that Jordan Peele has ever written. Jordan Peele is a phenomenal director through and through. I will support him till I die. But my favorite quote that he has ever said is, if we made this same movie with white people, this movie's already been made.
Yeah, it has.
And I think that's really important for people to understand, is because like if it were white people like in that whole cast, it wouldn't be the same movie.
No, it would be completely different movie. And like it would just be quite frankly, that movie would just be a weird movie to watch if it was just people. Mm-hmm. I think with his movie Us, like I think that's a completely different vibe, and I think that one would have been fine if it was a white cast, but I think there's something about making it a Black cast and where it's just African Americans, or where it's people from Britain or wherever they're from. Mm-hmm. And having it just be about them rather than having it just be about a whole bunch of white people, it makes the movie completely different. And I think it just changes it because it essentially, and like obviously I don't believe this, but like it humanizes them because it's finally like giving them a bigger voice in Hollywood rather than, you know, I mean, I've been friends with you for 10 plus, like almost 10 years at this point. Mm-hmm. I've obviously I obviously think that Black people are humans, but there are some people like still to this day who think that African Americans and anyone of another ethnicity that's not white are subhuman. And I think that like having these movies creates an education and like actually is like you know, you might think this, but in reality, this is how it genuinely is for Black people in America.
Right.
Okay, so this next question. So I'm just going to combine the last two questions because they're kind of similar and it's a big question. Okay, so the first one, pretty easy to answer. How old were you when you had to be told what it was like to be Black in America? And then follow that up with, when did you fully realize that you were different than a white person? And not in the sense of like by the color of your skin, by like your treatment in school or in any setting.
So when I don't really know a specific age. Probably like 8 years old is when my mom and my dad had to talk with me about how it's different being brown in America.
Yeah.
My little brother was taught at 8 because somebody told him he couldn't go on their slip and slide because he was brown. I mean, he was 8 years old, you know, and I think like for all of these African American communities and people of color's communities, like racism is a conversation that happens throughout their whole time in that household. And hi there. And a lot of like white people's houses where the racism conversation doesn't happen. And usually when it does, they're not talking about the same thing. They're talking about how you guys are never going to experience this. You know what I mean? And I think the racism conversation needs to happen in every single house because these people are teaching their kids to be racist.
Yeah.
And they're probably not even doing it. Like a lot of these families probably aren't doing it on purpose, but you know, you're not born to be racist. You're taught it through your childhood. I was never taught to be racist towards somebody. I was never taught to be hateful towards somebody, especially towards their skin color.
Yeah.
You know? And I think for a lot of brown people, their conversation starts when you're super, super young because these kids are taught at a super young age to be racist. So you have to combat it in any way you can.
It's harder for me just to like understand how someone could be taught those kind of things in their house just because, you know, I mean, you know, my mom, she's a history teacher. She's been teaching for, I think about 20 years, 20, 21, 22, something like that. And like, ever since I've been a kid, anytime we've gone out of state or we've gone somewhere that like has like, per se, something's in the Civil War era or before that, my mom always talks about, you know, this is what it was like to be Black in America at that time. Like she would emphasize at the time because that was slavery and all of that kind of stuff. And then she's like, and then she would be like, while it's not as bad as it was back then, it's still bad. So like my mom has given me that conversation where it's been like, you're not going to experience this because you are a white man. Like you are essentially, you have the most privilege out of any person is what she told me. But she was always emphasized the fact that not everyone has that same thing that I do, and that I need to make sure that I'm allowing people the same opportunities that I'm given just because of the fact, like, just because they're not going to be given those opportunities purely at the fact of skin color. And I mean, we can say that like, well, the United States government has laws to prevent that kind of stuff. Well, I mean, we all saw on the news a few days ago how they tried to remove sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation from job discrimination, and that you could get fired for being transgender or you could get fired for being gay. So obviously we're living in a society where if you're different from the straight white norm, then good luck.
Good luck, right?
That's all you got.
Well, and you know, my mom has been through the federal court system. My mom has gotten in trouble. She could have been charged with a felony. Mm-hmm. She got charged with a misdemeanor and she had to pay a fine, a pretty hefty one, which my family, being as privileged as we are, could afford to pay her fine. Yeah. So she got a misdemeanor and she didn't spend a second in jail. For a Black woman who might come from Chicago or Detroit or LA or any of these places, she would have been in prison. Oh yeah. She would have gone to prison and she would still be in there and she would be a felon. You know what I mean? Like,
it would at least be a 5-year sentence.
Exactly. like, it's not, I mean, you have to think about the little microaggressions that happen to people of color every day, but you also have to think about the bigger picture, because a lot of these brown people are going to jail for nothing, and white people are not going to jail for raping people for, I mean, don't get me wrong, my mom went to rehab, my mom got her life back on track, and she didn't deserve to go to jail. All I'm saying is that if she were a brown person, that situation would have been completely different.
It would have. Well, I mean, I think I saw you retweet something about this, but I'm not sure. There was that case where that white teacher who, I can't remember where he lived, he raped 28 kids and then only got, I think, about 8 years in prison. And like, we're literally, and like at that time, I think it was a whole bunch of first, second, or third graders, which is, that age range is one of the most developmentally important time for any, regardless of what age, what ethnicity, what gender. That's such an important time gap for development in every regard. And that guy essentially just completely derailed them. But I mean, he only got about 3.5 months per kid. So it's for me, it's sad for one, just because like it makes me just feel sick for all those kids. But then two, it also makes me disgusted, because it's like, why are people who are getting caught with less than an ounce of marijuana being charged, African Americans specifically, being charged and then getting about 10 years in prison? But then you have this guy who's not even getting 3.5 months for raping 28 kids. Or who raped a girl who was unconscious and got caught, and then the judge said, I don't want to ruin his future.
This is a nice young man.
Yeah.
Well, and you also have to think about like how it affects, I've talked with my dad a lot about this, because my dad is a felon. Back in, when I think it was either right before he turned 18 or right after he turned 18, he got into a fight with some guy, and he was walking away, and while he was walking away, he got a tap on his shoulder, and he thought it was the guy coming back, and my dad turned around and swung, and it was a cop. So my dad got a felony assault on a cop charge.
Yeah.
And he shouldn't have. His lawyer basically told him to take the, excuse my language, shitty end of the bargain there.
Yeah.
And so now my dad is a felon. And, you know, felons can't vote. Felons can't arm themselves. Felons can't do anything. You know what I mean? It's hard for my dad to get jobs. It's hard for my dad to get housing. It's hard for my dad to do all of these things. But it's also a systematic thing, because most of the people with felonies are highly African-American people and people of color. And most of their felonies are for things that, like, they shouldn't have gotten felonies for. And that's suppressing their voting rights. And it's also suppressing all of their constitutional rights as well, for things that they shouldn't even be felons for.
Yeah. Okay. So this is my favorite part of the questions. And I know that this is definitely a big topic, especially right now. So this is going to be the entire section that's talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. And then also in this category, because I figured it was just easiest to categorize Black Lives Matter and police brutality in one section, since the two go hand in hand. Because every time there's been a Black Lives Matter protest, it has been because of police brutality. So for the very first question, okay, no, I'm not going to ask that question because we've already talked about that. It was asking if you support it or if you're against it. And I know the answer to that, and you've already stated your answer for that. So, okay, this one is kind of a give me, like we've said it throughout the entire time we've been talking, but I just want to hear you say it again. So what do you think is the most important thing about the Black Lives Matter movement? Like, what do you think, like, its main message it's trying to spread? Why do you think people are doing this? Why is it important?
Okay, so a common misconception about the Black Lives Matter movement is that, like, we only care about Black people and that we don't really care about anything else. And that is completely incorrect. Every single Black Lives Matter movement I've been to that's in Montana, every single protest I've been to, there has been Native American speakers. We have been talking about every single person of color. In my speech that I did in Billings, I talked about people with different sexual identities, people with different skin colors, everybody, you know? And I also think a lot of people think that the Black Lives Matter movement is solely about violence and destruction. And that's not even true.
No.
Black Lives Matter is strictly about making change for the people of color living in this community that are facing scrutiny and discrimination every day just for the color of their skin.
Mhm.
And, like, the people that don't agree with Black Lives Matter are the minority in this situation. Like, there were 16,000 people that marched in Seattle the other day during their silent march.
Yeah.
And, they haven't been broadcasting it at all, but there's protests every single day around the country still. And I don't think the protests are going to stop, and I don't think they should.
No.
I think this has been brewing for a very, very long time. And, growing up in my family, I am privileged, and I didn't get it. I didn't even get a snippet of the worst that African American people get it on a daily basis. But I have experienced it, and I will always, always speak up for African American people and every other minority, because that's what this protest is about. Because everybody's saying a lot of people are saying all lives matter, and that's not true. All lives can't matter until gay people's lives matter, Black people's lives matter, trans, Native American, Asian American, Hispanic American, all lives don't matter right now.
Because if
there's like cops are still like, we're protesting police brutality and racism, and cops are combating that with police brutality.
Mm-hmm. It's
just like they're proving our point.
Well,
and that's why people are still marching.
And especially like going back and like looking at just historical evidence, specifically in regards to the Geneva Convention, using biological warfare is clearly against the Geneva Convention, and the United States has been constantly breaking that specific rule by tear gassing, by using mace, by using all these things.
Well, and I saw a video of the hoses on the fire trucks.
Yeah.
I saw a video earlier today of people getting sprayed down with those, and the water pressure is lethal.
Yeah.
And I saw this guy literally fly off of the ground.
Yeah.
After getting hit by this spray of water. And I just don't understand how you're combating protesters by hurting them. And that is literally, in my opinion, an act of domestic terrorism.
It is. And it's saddening because our president, Donald Trump, has declared Antifa as a terrorist organization, and he's trying to get it approved as a terrorist organization. But the issue is that he's thinking that essentially all these protesters are Antifa. But the thing is that every American should be Antifa, because Antifa just stands for anti-fascist.
And Antifa isn't even an organization; it's an ideology. And
my mom, she was talking about it, and she was like, "Well, then I guess he's gonna go arrest Grandpa Rocky and Uncle Star. They both fought in the Vietnam and Korean War, and they're both Antifa." Was, any veteran is Antifa. So unless you were gonna arrest every single veteran in the United States and throw them in the prison system, then you cannot declare Antifa as a terrorist organization.
And they still haven't put KKK as a terrorist organization. They've burned houses down. Just the other day, they burned a Black church down and wrote "Vote Trump" on it. And for the people that are saying that Trump doesn't incite violence, or that he doesn't incite racial violence, I'm going to ask, why do you think that? Because these people are doing this for their president. So tell me why these Trump supporters are going out of their way to inflict violence on people of color.
And people can try and justify it and say things like, well, they're not just doing it to places of color. And it's like, no, they are. They're specifically targeting Black places where Black people gather in large groups, whether that be at a church, whether that be at a community center, wherever it is. They're targeting those areas because they know that African Americans are going to be doing it. Well, and there's that new case where the people are thinking that there's a serial killer going around. I think it's in I know it's in California. I can't remember what city, but where they're getting hung from trees.
Yep.
It's just there's lynching going on, and like,
and they're calling it suicides.
yeah, and it's like we would never do that with a white person. We would
Never.
automatically assume foul play if we ever saw someone hanging from a tree.
Just the fact that we have to go into the streets and protest against and make people open up investigations that should have had investigations in the first place is just beyond me. This whole society is so ass backwards. I don't get it. I don't understand.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, we shouldn't have to protest for that. You should just do that.
Exactly. So going along with talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, there have been a lot of different things on social media. And I mean, I can speak personally about this. My Twitter feed, it's essentially just things involving the Black Lives Matter movement. It is videos of protests. It's videos. It's like, here are some petitions that haven't reached their goal yet, or stuff like that. And I know that yours is the same thing, because I mainly just see Lexi retweeted this. That's the number one thing I see on Twitter. But do you think that there's people, obviously there is, but do you know anyone, or do you think you know people who are just using this as to look non-racist, like who are just like posting Blackout Tuesday or posting Black Lives Matter on their story, or they're posting like justice for Breonna Taylor, justice for I mean, I can't even count all the people. There's so many.
Absolutely.
Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, like,
I do. A lot of people, you know, and I've read this article about you it's not okay just to be an ally. You know, like it is way more than that at this point, than for you to just be an ally posting on your Instagram story. Like on Blackout Tuesday, I posted a black photo, okay? And it is still on my timeline. I will not delete it.
I'm not taking it down. Mine's still up too.
Exactly. And a lot of people after the fact deleted it. And I posted a video and I was like, if you don't stand up against racial injustice in this country, delete it. Like, if you let your friends say the N-word, delete it. If you're rude to Native Americans because they're Native American, delete it. Like, don't get this twisted. Like, this is not some sort of trend for you to jump on to make people think you're not racist.
Yeah.
Like, don't let your friends act racist. Don't condone any behavior by anybody that's racist. Like, if you don't stand up when somebody is saying something blatantly racist to someone or around someone, then you're not for this. You're just doing this because you want to make it look like you're not racist.
You're doing it for the clout, or you're doing it to look better and make your character
like,
seem it's top tier.
Yeah, like sign petitions, donate to these people, these minority groups that are out there. We have 3 in Montana. I'm sure there's a few in North Dakota too.
Yeah.
Like, get out, donate, sign petitions, get out on the streets and fight for all the injustice that's happening, because I don't understand what people aren't getting. Yeah. I don't understand what people aren't.
When the first initial waves of the Black Lives Matter movement started, specifically talking about like the new wave, the one that's just doing, I went to the protest. I didn't get out of my car just because of the fact that I'm still social distancing, since I do work with kids who have weaker immune systems, and I can essentially be sending a kid on a death sentence if I in a huge group of people. So I'm doing it. I can't personally participate, but I have been signing petitions. I've been donating. I've been doing all these things because justice matters and because equality does matter. But I don't think that a lot of people in America are truly grasping that. And if they really did, they'd be doing the same things that I'm doing if they can't protest. Like, the thing is that I feel like so many people are thinking we can only protest, and that's the only thing. No, there's so many other things that we can do, but you just need to do your research. And I think that nobody is. And like, I'm not like, it's like, I'm not trying to laugh about it, but it's just.
No, you're frustrated. It's frustrating. No, I get it. I mean, there's so many things you can do, you know, like back when we had the Women's March in Billings, you know, people were emailing Steve Bullock. I mean, back when we were doing the walkout for gun control, I emailed Steve Bullock. You got to talk to your lawmakers. You have to get in contact with your police stations and make your voices heard. Like, this isn't just about your Instagram photos at the protests in your cute Coachella outfits. Like, that's not what this is about.
It's all about rights.
It's not about getting clout for you fighting for people's rights when you're not.
Like, this
like
is,
on a normal day, are you doing that?
No, like, most of these people, like, I mean, I've seen this on your Twitter and I've seen it on mine. We both have we've not protested. We both have retweeted countless things before this huge movement even started, talking about equality for Black people, talking about equality for gay people, for trans people, for women, for all these different groups, for all these minority groups. We've been doing that since the start. And in high school, I was attacked for it by multiple of my friends because they're like, well, you're just posting all this liberal crap and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, no, this isn't a political matter. This is a human rights matter. And I think that's the thing that I think disgusts me about this the most out of anything, is that when people are defending, when they're saying blue lives matter, when they're saying all lives matter, when they're saying all this stuff, they're defending a systemic racist society that doesn't care about the minority groups, that doesn't care about women, that doesn't care about gay people, that doesn't care about all of these different minority groups. The only thing that they care about is upkeeping this white patriarchal society. And people can call me a liberal for thinking that all I want, when history is just proving my point right. Like, if that's liberal by just believing the truth and by believing facts, then I mean, call me a liberal.
Call me a liberal.
Call me.
And you know, I think it's really interesting that the fact I've learned more about African heritage and African American heritage in this country on Twitter than I have in the school systems.
Exactly. Like, I think the most I remember about African Americans is from school is the Civil War. I can talk about Harriet Tubman, I can talk about Frederick Douglass, and I can talk about Phyllis Wheatley. Those are the three main people that I remember. Obviously, people know who Rosa Parks is. Obviously, people know who Ruby Bridges. I think that's her last name, right?
Yep.
Like, obviously, people know who those are. But like, at my high school, so we did National History Day every single year, where we had to, like, you get a topic and then you have to create an entire project on it. I specifically went out of my way to choose someone who no one knew and who was African American, because I wanted to show an African American leader that, like, no one knew about. So then I chose Reverend Addie Wyatt, who not only helped the women's rights movement and helped get women's equal pay, but also helped out with African American movement. She worked personally with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yep.
See her in a history book. Finding sources for her was one of the hardest things I've had to do in my life. Like, I could not find a single source about her because we only focus on Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, all these, like, big head figures, but we don't even consider any of the little ones because they don't fit the narrative. And
did you know that Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to do a bus boycott?
Can't remember her name, but the only reason why they didn't choose her is because she was pregnant as a high school girl.
Yep, and she would have made white people uncomfortable.
So they chose Rosa Parks because she was an older woman and she was a good person.
And the whole Black Lives Matter movement, like, I mean, you know, the whole civil rights movement was up to making white people comfortable up until the riots started and you know, like, even today we're fighting the same injustices that my great grandparents fought. You know, like, it's just beyond. It's beyond anything anybody can comprehend. It goes so much deeper than just Black Lives Matter. It goes so much deeper than just people protesting in the streets over George Floyd's death, because it's not just his death. It's 400 years of systematically being oppressed. And people are like, well, you can go get jobs, you can go do this, you can go do that. And I'm like, okay, but my dad can't go for a jog.
Yeah.
My dad can't sleep in his bed. My dad can't go to a gas station and pay with a $20 bill without the person saying that it's counterfeit. Like, tell me that. Tell me why.
Getting getting a speeding ticket and then ended up getting shot somehow, or ending up, oh God, what was the story? Playing cops and robbers as a young boy and then getting shot because you have a toy gun, even though it's clearly a toy gun.
Yep.
It's these little tiny things that people are like, that's not really racist, or like the cops are justified in doing that, when please explain to me how Breonna Taylor is living in her house. She walks out to see why her door is being bust down and then gets shot countless times. Or why Tamir Rice was murdered by police officers for playing a game with his friends. Or why Philandro Castile was shot for lawfully owning a gun. It's just these little things that
Tell me why George Zimmerman, the guy that killed Tamir Rice, or Trayvon Martin, he killed Trayvon Martin, tell me why he sold the gun that he used for $100,000.
It was even more than that. I think it was about 200,000. Like, I think.
Tell me why he got acquitted for murdering a 14-year-old boy.
He was like
anywhere boy
of like 14 to 17, I think.
Tell me why he was acquitted and then could sell the firearm that was used. Tell me why he was signing
M&Ms, packets of M&Ms, because that was what Trayvon Martin had on him when he died. Or no, it was Skittles.
That right there is why people are marching. That is why people are out in the streets.
It's amazing to me that like people don't see these injustices and then think to themselves, oh my God, this is just blatant racism, or that this is disgusting. How is our society letting this happen? We just think, oh, well, all lives still matter. Or, you know, well, these police officers still matter. And it's like, okay, but the police officers are A, using chemical warfare, and B, using rubber bullets. That's the part that like, and like, people have gone blind from those. Like
people are being shot at point blank range with rubber bullets. And the point of rubber bullets is to disarm somebody by shooting the rubber bullets at the ground and then bouncing. Yeah. Tell me why I could be right here, Mark, and I could shoot you with a rubber bullet and I could crack your skull open.
Yeah. And why
they're not lethal.
Yeah. Or the fact that tear gas, if you're wearing contacts, can make you go permanently blind, but we're not caring about that because of the fact that we shouldn't be out on the streets protesting.
Well, and you know, I've seen a lot of counter arguments about it, like from the retired police chief that died in one of the protests. He was killed, and it's not okay. It was very, very sad. I mourned with his family. I hope that man rests in peace. And, you know, a lot of people are using that as like backlash against the Black Lives Matter movement, but the Black Lives Matter movement didn't want that. The person that did that obviously didn't understand what the Black Lives movement was fighting for, because nobody wanted that. The Black Lives Matter movement didn't call for violence. They didn't call for all of these things to happen. And this guy's death was a tragedy, of course, but he was caught in the crossfires of a horrible, horrible time. You know what I mean?
It's just, it hurts my heart just because of the fact that people are using these instances to completely exempt the Black Lives Matter movement. And they're saying, well, a Black person did this, so obviously they only care about themselves. No, right. Because if you really looked into the Black Lives Matter movement, it's standing up not only for Black people, it's standing up for everyone that is oppressed, regardless of your skin color and regardless of your gender or gender identity. It will stand up for you. And like, clearly it's not going to be standing up for someone who's a cis, straight, white male. Like, and I mean, that's just because they're not oppressed.
Right.
Like, they still are like, please, if you're that, come join our ranks. Come take up why can't I think of it? Poster and protest with us. Come speak out and talk about how you can use your privilege to enable other people to have that same privilege. It's right. These little things that I think people are just thinking, well, I don't need to do that because I'm white. but
Right.
like it doesn't involve me, but it does. It involves every single one of us because it's like the age-old adage, if you're not with us, you're against us. And essentially what the phrase is either you're against racism or you're not. And you're continuing to allow a racist system that precedes in American society.
Well, and things also need to be, it's deeper than being anti-racism.
Yeah.
You need to be pro-minority. You don't need to just be anti-racism.
Yeah. And like,
because it's a lot deeper than that.
Okay, so this question goes along with talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. We've both said it, but I just want to, again, I like to restate things and make sure that they're fully gotten across. So, like we've said, Black Lives Matter, we don't mean that white lives mean less. We don't mean that police lives mean less. It means that we want Black people to be on the same level that white people do. Obviously, like there's been a lot of Twitter feed recently specifically talking about how Black men don't stand up for Black women.
Okay.
And I've seen a lot of tweets about it. I don't know if you have. I've
Mm-hmm.
a lot. So when people say Black Lives Matter and that and talking about that entire trend, but then they're not standing up against racism. They're not racism. Well, racism, when they're not standing up for gay Black men, when they're not standing up for gay lesbian women, gay Black lesbian women, when they're not standing up for I completely missaid that. Black lesbian women or Black transgendered people. Do you think that they actually believe that Black lives matter, or do you think that they're just saying only Black cis lives matter?
I think the minority of people that say Black Lives Matter mean Black cis lives matter, and I don't think that's okay because it's a lot like the fight for intersectional feminism. And so for anybody that doesn't know what intersectional feminism is, and it's feminism for every single woman on this planet.
Yes.
And just regular feminism was fought when white women got the rights to vote. And a lot of people don't know that and Black women didn't get the right to vote until a long time after white women did. And that's when intersectional feminism was created, was to create this equality between every single color of women. Yeah. And it's the same kind of thing with Black Lives Matter. Like you can't say Black Lives Matter if you don't mean all Black lives. It's the same fight against, you can't say all lives matter if you don't believe all lives matter, because like the Stonewall riots, those were started by a Black trans woman.
Exactly.
Like how can you be gay and not be pro Black Lives Matter? How can you be Black Lives Matter and not pro LGBTQ plus? You know what I mean? Like it's not, this isn't pie. You can't take your slice.
You got to take either, it's just kind of like a small little cookie. You take the whole thing and you eat it, or it's like a little Oreo. You eat it all.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably not the best term to use.
And I think it's always going to be, there's always going to be people that don't, there's always going to be Black Lives Matter people that don't think that Black gay lives matter. There's always going to be all lives matter people that don't believe gay lives matter. You know what I mean? Like, and it's always going to be like that. But I think throughout these next generations, that's slowly going to fade away, because I think our generation is a huge, huge, huge fighter for every single person's rights.
Well, I mean,
and I'm very proud of our generation for that.
I mean, me too, because like just going on, like, I remember like when when George Floyd's death had first happened and like it was flooding all over social media. I couldn't go on Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, any social media, you name it. I could not go on a single one of those without seeing at least 4 different posts talking about that. And that just shows the power that young people have and how much we hold in the value of equality, because we want change for everyone, not just for white people. We don't want us to be on this level where we're more elevated than everyone else. We actually want to see change within our society. And I think that that's like, it like absolutely amazes me, because like with my own kids at work, like I work with kids who have disabilities, and like seeing them like obviously I see them go through discrimination on a completely different level, and I have to stand up for them all the time. Like, earlier when we first started this conversation and you were talking about going into schools in public and like having to get different looks from people. I've seen the same exact thing with my kids whenever we go into schools, and I've heard the whispers of like, oh my god, what's wrong with that kid, or like stuff like that. And it's just like, with our society, I've only seen that with people who are 40 and up. And like, I mean, that like, I hate saying that because I feel like I'm an ageist, but like, I've never once seen a young person like whisper about my kid or have made a snide comment about them or anything like that. Or like,
Yep.
time a kid was counting change and the guy behind us was like, oh, why do they let people with disabilities do this kind of crap? And I had a kid who was pretty disabled, and I turned around and I was like, that was like the one time. Usually I'm pretty eloquent in responding. That was the first time that I was just like completely taken aback, because like it was like that was like essentially my first moment of like experiencing discrimination, where like it's like, I mean, my kids are like my biological kids. Like,
Right.
I develop a relationship that's so close with them because sometimes they don't have their parental figures in their life, and they live with foster families. So like, having to hear someone say that, like, it's like those feelings of like being like, it felt like I was the one getting attacked. And I mean, obviously I wasn't, but like, that just like, I feel like that moment for me especially was just when I was like that really just defined my moment where I was like, I need to stand up for all lives, and I need to make sure that it is clear that I am like a part of this, because I want everyone to understand that regardless of ability, regardless of race, regardless of identity, regardless of who you are, we're all equal. Like, I mean, no one is on a different scale because of who they're born as. The only thing that makes us different is our socioeconomic status. And that's essentially the only thing that we should be leveled on, purely at the fact that that's just how much you make. But even then, there's not equal pay. So it's
all lives don't matter.
Until
And
every
that's
single life matters.
exactly. And all of these people that are saying all lives matter, they don't mean disabled people. They don't mean Black people. They don't mean Syrian people coming from war-torn areas. They don't mean the thousands of kids in adoption agencies that don't have families. They don't mean any of these people. They just mean they want their normal back.
Well, and like, that post that obviously the audience is gonna know what this is, but that post that Mackenzie posted talking about that Trump shirt that he was selling, since I go to Catholic school, we're not going to talk about it. Like, that person who was talking about the foster system and saying like, well, there's so many kids we can just put all the kids in the foster system. But the thing is like, the foster system in itself is not a good place. Like,
well, and also, are these people going to go adopt the Black kids in these adoption agencies? Are they going to go adopt the natives? Are they going to adopt the Latino people? Are you going to go adopt a little white kid? Like,
specifically a white baby. Because
exactly.
They don't want someone who's older than 4.
Exactly.
And that's just the issue that we have at hand, is that, you know, we can say that like we care about all kids and we care about all these people. So then if we do, why are there so many Black kids in the foster care system? Why are there so many Black kids in the adoption system? Why are we seeing all these things? Or why are people adopting people from Africa or China or all these different countries, essentially to not look racist? Like, I mean, that in itself is a completely racist thing, because you're gaining this white savior complex. And you're on this higher level because, oh, well, I saved someone from their country. Well, you might have, but you're also looking like an absolute jerk for doing it.
Right.
Well, and like, I mean, my cousin did it, and like, she brags about it all the time on Facebook, and it's like, clearly you don't care that much about it if you are bragging about it. Like,
well, you know, I have a friend that was adopted into a white family, and, you know, because of it, he has really conservative views, which is fine.
Yeah.
But he you know, his family treats him like he's different. And that's exactly what a lot of people are talking about, is like with the white savior complex. Like, okay, you're raising a Black kid, but that doesn't mean you're not racist. That doesn't mean that you're not instilling these racist ideals into your kids.
It's a completely disgusting thing to have to see. And like, we see it all the time. And it amazes me that like we essentially allow it to happen because we're not stopping these people from doing it. And like,
Right.
I've seen the same thing with Black people. And like, they use it as like a pinpoint to staple, I had a Black kid.
Right.
That doesn't make you racist. Like, that doesn't make you any less racist. Just because you had a Black kid, you can still be racist.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I asked all of my questions. Do you have any other statements you want to make or anything else you think that we need to say?
Are you showing this in a class or something?
I'm sending it to my teacher, and I'm just going to say that the times that you swore were about telling a story.
I just want it to be known that like the Black Lives Matter movement is a very, very important movement. It's not just for Black people, and it's not just for Black straight people either. The Black Lives Matter movement is for everybody facing injustice in this country. You know, like at the protests in Billings, I have seen so many Native Americans at these protests. And in my speech that I did, I was like, I will fight for you guys as much as you guys have fought for us. Because even minority people are like, wow, this time isn't about us right now.
Yeah.
Because they know. But especially in Montana, Native Americans, in my opinion, get it the worst here. Because 1% of the population is Black people, but there's a larger amount of Native American people here than there are Black people. And I think it's very important to give the Native American people a voice, even during the time of Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
But no, I think we've pretty much covered all our bases, Mark.
I really do think we talked about a lot. That was, I think, a full hour.
Yeah, Jesus.
Well, it happens. All right. Well,
yeah, it was good. It was good.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to stop recording.